Hi lovelies! Welcome or welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name's Maria and today's video is going to be me going through 10 books I really want to reread soon. And I'll be honest, before kind of a year or so ago, I wasn't really a huge rereader, but I ended up kind of embarking on a full reread of all of the Sarah J Maas books with some of my friends on Bookstagram, and it really made me realise how fun and how much I actually loved rereading some books that I really loved in the past and kind of re-experiencing those worlds, kind of knowing what's going to happen in the end, but also noticing some of the smaller details, some of the foreshadowing, just re-immersing myself into that world and how I could still feel fresh and new. And each time I reread it, I may notice little different things about the writing, about the narrative, about the characters, and it really made me think, are there other books that I should be trying to do that with? Even though I've got a million books on my TBR and so many new books that I want to get to, I really do have a huge urge to read some of my favourites and go back and reread those to see if the second time I read them, is there a different experience? Do I kind of notice more? Because I do find with books that I'm really enjoying, I can read through them quite quickly and I will get the overall story, I will kind of take it all in, but when you're allowing yourself to read it a little bit more slowly because you're not kind of anticipating what's going to happen, you know what's going to happen, so you don't have to kind of speed through it to see how things are going to end. You do end up picking up little more details and you can really immerse yourself and enjoy it a little bit more. And just for me personally, I feel like I can slow down on my reading experience with it because I'm not trying to push through to figure out what happens. So I've got a list of 10 books here that I really want to reread soon. Some of them are books that I read probably more recently than others. Some of them have been at least 10 to 12 years since I've read them, so obviously that's a reason why I do want to reread them. But yeah, all of them are books that I've really loved, books that I really think of when people are asking for recommendations, or just some of my favourite books that kind of define my style. So I won't be going in any particular order, it's literally just in the order that I lifted them off my shelves. So the first book I've picked up is The Hunger Games by Suzanne Collins, and if you haven't heard of this, I would be very, very surprised. Most people have heard of this one, and the reason I want to reread this one is because I know obviously the prequels have come out and I haven't read those yet, because I am kind of holding off until I do a reread of the first 3 books within that kind of overall series. And it has been quite a long time since I read this one. I read these books just before the first movies were coming out because I wanted to read the books before I watched the movies, and really loved them at the time and would love to read the prequels that kind of go along with these, but I want to read these again before I do that so that I can kind of pick up on the little Easter eggs that I'm sure there are in the prequels. I've heard a lot of people talking about them, so I know my memory is not good enough to remember those, so I just want to get a better experience with those. So rather than just jumping in, I think I will try and reread these first and then jump into those prequels. But as I said, if you haven't heard of this one, it's kind of a dystopian novel in this world where there's different districts, and the further you get out from the capital, which is the central district, the poorer and poorer you get. And within this world they do have trials. I can't remember how often they are, but essentially one person from each district is nominated. They go into these trials and essentially fight to the death, and it's kind of following one of the characters in here, Katniss Everdeen, who ends up going in place of her sister to the trials, and we just kind of follow along her story. It's a lot about kind of obviously capitalism and elitism, fascism, all of that type of thing within there. There's so many messages in here that are actually very relevant to today's world, so if you've never read this before, probably be a good time to pick this up. And yeah, I just love the writing, love the story, love the narrative. I think the movies were actually pretty good adaptations of these as well, so even if you've watched the movies, I would still recommend reading the books because, as always, the books were better. So next up I've got Clockwork Angel, which is kind of representing a series or a trilogy within a series, and that's The Infernal Devices from Cassandra Clare. Now this is part of the Shadowhunter series. I don't think I want to reread that entire series. I did really love it, but there's around 16 books within that overall series, so one trilogy within that series really stood out to me, and it was The Infernal Devices, which is chronologically the first storyline within that overall series. This one is set in kind of more, I think it's like Victorian England. We're following a few different characters within that Shadowhunter world, and yeah, I just think in this one the characters were perfect. I loved there is a bit of a love triangle in here, and they're definitely the characters that I enjoyed reading about the most throughout this series, and they do kind of appear in some of the other series as well because it is all connected. But I just remember the visceral reaction I got when reading this series, and always said I would love to reread this trilogy. I did annotate it the first time that I read it, so I'd love to go through and read my annotated editions to see what I was thinking at the time and kind of see if I pick out anything different. But again, if you haven't heard of the Shadowhunter series, it's following these people who are born into kind of this society who can have natural affinities to defeat demons and vampires, werewolves, and basically keep humans safe. They're very secluded from the rest of humankind. They kind of keep to themselves, and again, it's kind of an urban fantasy. We are just following the characters along with their relationships, and a lot of this is character based. There are some good narrative plots in here. Obviously it is quite fast paced, there is a lot of fantasy elements in here, but a lot of what Cassandra Clare does for me personally is her character work and kind of the character relationship. There's a lot of angst in here, especially as I say with that love triangle, and yeah, just really love that trilogy, so definitely want to get this on my reread list. Next up is one I think I will actually reread in the next few months, and that's The Dead Romantics by Ashley Poston. Now, if you've been here a while, you may have heard me say that Ashley Poston is one of my favourite romance authors. I don't read a lot of contemporary romance, but from what I have read, she's definitely one of the favourites and definitely a standout for me because she just has a bit of a different twist and it's a lot more whimsical, I think a lot more lighthearted on the outset, but there is usually a lot of depth in there. It usually deals with a lot of grief and things like that, and I just really loved everything I've read from her, and this was the first book I read from her. I'd say probably still my favourite, maybe tied with The 7-Year Slip, but I think this one just puts it to the post just because of the kind of setting of this one and the background in this one, and it may just be that I read this one first. But in this one we're following Florence Day, who is a ghostwriter for a very famous romance author, and she's just feeling very uninspired because of recent developments within her own life, and essentially she gets a new editor who is very hardline with her, and when she asks for an extension he basically says out of the question, no, and she's at a bit of a loss as to what to do at this point. She ends up getting a call from home as she needs to go home because of a family emergency, and when she gets there, lo and behold, her editor is actually there. Only problem is he happens to be a ghost, so we're kind of following their journey on figuring out how this has happened, how they can kind of rectify it, and it's just a really beautiful kind of heartwarming story. Again, in here there is a lot of discussion around grief and kind of familial dynamics and things like that, and I just really loved it, so I definitely want to listen to this again. I listened to the audiobook and really loved it, so I think that's how I will read this one again this autumn because it's just a perfect autumn book as well. So if you're looking for an autumn romance, definitely add this one to your TBR. So the next up on the list that I do want to reread is also V.E. Schwab's The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue, and again I think this would be a great autumn or winter read. This one is very much more character driven. We're following a character who is, I think it's around the 1500s or something like that. Sorry, 1700s. A little bit later, and essentially we're following this woman who is about to be the age where she'll have to get married and have kids and kind of settle down, and she just doesn't want that. She wants more from her life. So at the start of the story she ends up making a deal with this demon to have immortal life. However, the catch is that no one will remember her, and while it seems kind of inconsequential at the time, we kind of see Addie LaRue realising how much impact this has on her life and how she feels, and it really does raise a load of questions about human interaction, human relationships. What is life if it's not to kind of interact with other humans and have an impact on them? What would life be if no one remembers you, or if you don't have an impact on other people's lives? And it's quite hard to describe this one because, as I said, it's very much character driven. There's not a lot of plot, but when you're reading it, for me personally anyway, I just felt so much when I was reading this one, and it was definitely quite emotional when it came to the end, and I feel like in this one you do get really attached to the characters as well. So really want to reread this one just to see if I can again see any of those differing details and kind of pick up on some of that foreshadowing and just some of the other messages that V.E. Schwab was wanting to put in here. And yeah, I just think the writing was really beautiful in this one as well, so that's kind of the main reason I want to pick this one up again. And then continuing with our autumn reads, I do really want to reread A Discovery of Witches series by Deborah Harkness. Now, this is actually one of the first books I read that got me back into reading kind of really regularly. Before this I was maybe reading one book a month or something like that for quite some time, but decided to pick this series up on a whim, and it kind of just pushed me back into reading fantasy and led into kind of my reading style that I have today. I've always been a big fantasy reader, but for about 5 or 10 years I was reading a lot more thriller, a lot more contemporary fiction, and for some reason just hadn't picked up a lot of adult fantasy. Had seen this recommended and, as I say, decided to pick it up on a whim and really loved this. It's obviously a bit of dark academia in here as well. So we have a professor in Oxford who is researching in the library, ends up getting this manuscript that she shouldn't have access to, and this essentially gets a lot of different people within this world interested in her. So we've got werewolves, we've got vampires, we've got witches, all the great things that you want in an urban fantasy. And even though this is quite a chunky book, this is quite a substantial book, I ended up flying through this series really quickly just because I was loving it so much. And as I say, it is kind of one of the books that really got me back into reading, so really want to reread this now that it's been maybe about 5 years since I've read this one. I have actually just ordered the US paperbacks of this because I don't really love this edition. I did buy it, but it was quite cheap and I don't really love this edition. It's, as you can see, very shiny. I think this is kind of the mass paperback version, and it's quite rigid, and as this is quite, you know, substantial, I really wanted to get a floppy US paperback, and I just like the covers better. So I have actually ordered that in preparation to hopefully read that this autumn as well. Maybe even just the first book. I may not get the whole trilogy read, but I potentially want to read the first book in this one again. And as it says on here, it is a Sky production. There was a series made out of this, and I think the series was actually pretty good in terms of an adaptation for this. So if you've read it and you were interested in that show, definitely give it a go. I really enjoyed it. But if you haven't read the books, definitely read the books first because, as I always say, the books were better. Next up is a series that I've kind of read over the last couple of years just because I think it started out, it was supposed to be a trilogy or maybe a 4-book series, and it's just grown and grown that much where there's kind of a prequel series now. There's around 16 books within the series, and I just feel like it's been so long since I read this first book and loved it that I'd love to revisit it and maybe just read the series, you know, slowly through again, especially because we do have the last book coming out in this September. So still trying to decide whether I want to do an entire reread before I read that, or whether I read that first and then just slowly make my way through this series again. So the series that I'm talking about is the From Blood and Ice series by Jennifer L. Armentrout. So in this one we're following Poppy, who is the maiden within this world, and essentially the lore around the maiden is that she will sacrifice herself to the Ascension for the betterment of this kingdom that she's living in. Now the maiden isn't allowed to really speak to people, she's not allowed to interact with anyone, she's obviously quite virtuous and quite pure, but certain things happen here that kind of make it not possible for Poppy to be able to fulfill that fate, and the story goes from there. I don't like to give too much about this first book because if you don't know what happens within the first book or the twist within it, it is actually pretty well done and I didn't see it coming. So I would definitely highly recommend going into this one a little bit blind if you can. I will say that the writing style in this does get a little bit of flack online, and it's not the best writing style. I will admit it's not the best writing style for me either, but the story, the narrative and the characters in here, for me personally, have just been good enough for me to kind of not persevere with the writing style. I don't think it's that bad. You know, I certainly couldn't write this book, so I don't want to critique it too much, but it's probably not my usual writing style and it can be a little bit repetitive at times as well. I do think that it could be edited down at times, and as I say, there's like 16 books at this point, but for me personally, I just really loved the world and the narrative and the characters that she's built within here, and as soon as I start reading it, that writing style, kind of some of those niggles I have just go out the window because I'm enjoying it so much. So if you've seen some of that kind of negative rhetoric online, I would say still just give it a try, because a lot of what people say are things that would normally put me off, but I really loved it. So do with that what you will. Probably just a sign to always give things a try yourself, because you just never know what you're going to like. Next up, I want to reread When the Moon Hatched by Sarah A. Parker, and the main reason I want to reread this one is because the next book in this one will be coming out, I believe it's early 2026. So I do have a little bit of time to reread this one before that release, but I just feel like this one had so much information in there that I really need to reread this just before I read the second book to really enhance that experience I have with that second book. So in this one we're following Rave, who is a assassin for the rebellion within this kingdom, and she ends up getting captured by their enemy, essentially the Guild of Nobles who are running the kingdom, and at the very start of this book her options are kind of at an end. The Guild of Nobles actually end up getting taken over by this other rebellion group that Rave wasn't part of, but the head of that group gives her an option to work with him to gain her freedom, and the story goes from there. This is quite a convoluted plot, and the way that it's told is quite flowery writing, quite purple prose as well, so it's kind of hit and miss for a lot of people, but I really love purple prose and flowery writing, so it worked perfectly for me. I think there's a glossary in here that's around 20 pages or something like that, of all the different deities that we have in here, all the different folklore, kind of what different things mean, and it does mean that it was quite a confusing read for the first maybe 150 to 200 pages. Didn't really grasp what was going on, but as soon as you got that, it did all make sense, it all fell into place, and I just really loved the writing in here. I just felt like it really swept me away, and I really can't wait for the second book with the way this one ended, but definitely want to reread this just to refresh my memory, because there was a lot packed in this first book, and I just feel like reading the second book straight after reading this first book again would just be a much richer experience for me. So hopefully going to be reading this probably early 2026. Next up is one you'll probably not be surprised to see, because I do think I've mentioned it quite a few times, but that's An Ember in the Ashes series by Sabaa Tahir, and this one I just want to reread because I love it so much, and I'm getting FOMO because a lot of people are discovering it for the first time and reading it, and I just want to be in this world again. Now in this one we're following Leia, who is a scholar within this land that is run by a martial academy. Essentially they are one of the lower classes within this world, and at the start of the story Leia's brother is actually arrested for being part of a rebellion against this martial empire. So Leia travels to that headquarters to try and break her brother out and save him essentially, and when she's there she ends up meeting Elias, who is the son of the commandant of this martial empire. So essentially he is supposed to go on to become the head of the empire itself. Problem is that he doesn't really agree with a lot of the stuff that they do, so he ends up reluctantly allying with Leia to try and break her brother out, and the story goes from there and we're following them together. So you've got reluctant allies, we've got a lot of kind of Persian mythology I think mixed within here as well, and again this is a story that just really swept me away. I read these so quickly as well. well because I was so invested in the characters and the narrative and figuring out what happened, and it's just a story that's really stuck in my heart. So I really want to reread this as soon as possible. Any chance I get to kind of put this first book on my TBR, I'm going to do it. And I am feeling a little bit slumpy recently, I think just because I've been so busy, and I think that would actually be a great time to read a favourite, so this could potentially be read ASAP, but I've said that a few times, so I'm not too sure when I'll pick this one up, but it's definitely very high on the priority list for my rereads. Then next up we've got Daughter of No Worlds by Carissa Broadbent, and this one is one that I think is kind of underrated, quite honestly. I do think it's getting traditionally published now, which will definitely help it get to the audience that it needs to get to, because so many people love the Serpent and the Wings of Night series, which I do also. I absolutely love that series, but for me, this one is just a little bit better. It is definitely more my style and kind of had that immediate 5-star quality when I was reading it. Now, this is much more fantasy over romance, so if you're used to Carissa Broadbent's writing where it kind of is definitely more romance forward, it may be a little bit jarring jumping into this one, but if you know that it's kind of more fantasy forward going into it, I don't think you'll have a problem. But in this one we're following Tasana, who has been a slave her entire life, and a few different things happen where she ends up killing her slaver and has to go on the run. As she's going on the run, she ends up going in front of this world order who offer to help her in exchange for her offering them her magic as part of their kind of plan to save the realm. And let's just say things might not be as they seem, but as part of this bargain she ends up getting a mentor called Maxentarius Farleone, and we follow their relationship along and the story goes from there. But in this one I will just say that expect the unexpected. There's a lot of kind of growth even from this first book to the third book. Where the narrative goes is completely unexpected, and I do think that the story in here could rival a lot of high fantasy that I've read as well. I mean, I haven't read a huge amount of high fantasy, but when I compare kind of the complexity of this story to those, I definitely think this could compare to it. So if you're someone who prefers high fantasy but you maybe want a little bit of romance in your stories, definitely check this one out, because I think this could maybe satisfy both sides of that kind of genre preference for you. But yeah, it's just a trilogy that I really loved the writing in here. It is slightly different, as I say, than her other series. I do think this is probably a little bit more flowery, but for me personally I really loved that. So yeah, again, not sure when I'll get this on the list, but it's definitely high up there on priorities to get on my reread list. And then lastly is a book that I can't do a video without speaking about, apparently, and that's Strange the Dreamer by Laini Taylor. And this series, this duology, is just quite honestly probably my favourite duology of all time. I absolutely love the writing in this. I love the characters, I love the narrative, everything about this. I just remember when reading it having such visceral reactions, and I'm not really like that when I'm reading. I'm very much plain-faced, you know, all my emotions are on the inside, but with this one there was audible gasps, there was giggling, there was, you know, just all those reactions that maybe other people get all the time, but for me to kind of pull that reaction from me is very rare. So I knew this was something very special when I was reading it, and again, I think even though it does have its moment, I think it's quite underrated. I don't think there's a lot of people that really talk about this one, or most people that I know have it on their TBR but just haven't picked it up yet. And I just want to implore anyone who has this on their TBR, just pick it up. It's so good. For me personally anyway, I just can't rave about it enough. But in this one we start off with Laszlo Strange. He is a junior librarian within this kind of compound, and he has kind of a special interest in this lost city of Weep. Basically a city that has disappeared and no one knows how it happened, why it happened, where the people who live there have gone, and he's kind of made it his life's mission to decipher that and to figure that out. He gets an opportunity to join kind of a convoy of warriors who are going to try and find this city, and we're basically following his journey as he gets there, as he discovers some of the secrets around this lost city of Weep, and it's just a really beautiful journey as he goes along there. Now, it's really hard to describe this one without giving you spoilers, but again, with this one, just expect the unexpected. I think if you read the prologue of this one, you'll realise how kind of dark it can get as well. So even though it's a really beautiful story, there's definitely a lot of darkness in here. Don't necessarily expect that happy ever after within this one. There's a lot of different things that happen in here that will pull at your heartstrings as well, but I could gush about this one all day. All in all, as I say, pretty much on every recommendation video, I absolutely love this duology. I know it won't be for everyone because it is very much purple prose and flowery writing, so if you don't like that, I would say give it a try, but I can see why you may not love it because it is very much dependent on that kind of purple prose and flowery writing. But if you read the prologue and you like it and it intrigues you, which I think it will, it has one of the best prologues I've ever read. I can't recommend it enough, and yeah, really want to reread this as soon as possible, and as I say, go over all my annotations and see if I can pick out any of the other details in there that I might have missed the first time, because there is so much in here that I have so many tabs in the book that I read that I just can't wait to see those annotations and kind of relive those visceral reactions again. So yeah, last on this list, but definitely not last on my priority in terms of reread. So hopefully I will be able to get to this soon. So that's it. That's the 10 books that I've got kind of on my immediate reread list and ones that I want to get to sooner rather than later. As I say, before kind of a couple of years ago, I definitely wouldn't have been a huge advocate for rereading. I would say I want to read, you know, new books over rereading old books, but now that I've reread a few books, I can definitely see the magic and the charm in doing that. So let me know in the comments below if there's any books you think you would like to reread if you get the time to. Do you like rereading, or are you totally against it? Definitely put all of that in the comments below. And if you don't have anything to comment, just put a little book emoji to let me know you've got to the end. If you like this video, do remember to give it a like, and if you want to see more from me, remember to subscribe. I post 2 videos per week, and it's videos like this, so book recommendation videos, book shopping, TBR jars, all good bookish things like that. Other than that, thanks so much for watching this one. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next one soon. Bye!